All right, so let's jump into the internet weather, and we actually have some interesting trends in the internet weather that we hadn't seen before. So the first chart we have here is the most probe ports. This is the most raw scan probe activity. So not necessarily a lot of machines doing scanning, but it could be a small number of machines doing lots of scanning. So it's the most probe ports report here. And in this one, this week, and again, this is looking at this week versus last week. We did have a couple of weeks off, so we might have missed a couple of trends that are occurring, and actually we'll probably see some of that here. Some things that we missed or happened while we were all away on vacation over the holidays here. In general here, the top port 135 TCP, we've seen a lot of activity on that for a while now. I didn't bring a chart up on that one. Some of the other ones were a little more interesting. Still not quite sure what's going on there. We know that there's some actors scanning on that and perhaps trying to leverage open file shares or something with NetBIOS or SMB, I guess it is. But in any event, no big new change in that one. Last week it was #1 position, same thing. 23 TCP Telnet, we're seeing a lot of scanning on that. There's a lot of embedded devices being scanned for that, as well as the embedded devices scanning in turn for additional devices. If you have a home DSL router or some type of residential gateway that's at the perimeter of your home network, you might want to take a look at it or poke it from outside if you can determine what your external IP address, your internet-facing IP address is, just to see if it's open for Telnet. There are a lot of families of devices out there, not so much in the US, but internationally, there's a lot of devices for one reason or another that are open on 23 TCP, and then people are finding them and trying to brute force password guess their way into these devices, and then turn them into bots. We've seen a few different botnets spin up on these embedded devices. Light Hydra is one of the toolkits. There's another one that's really big right now, and I can't remember what family it is again. But in any event, they're mostly being used for DDoS activity. Some of them actually are doing Bitcoin mining, even though it's a very low-powered device, your home router, but we're probably digressing a little bit too much. 9064 TCP, we've talked about this one before. This is proxy scanning. Whatever reason, I haven't determined why this is. There are a lot of proxies listening on port 9064 TCP. So people are scanning, looking for them, and that's probably just so they can anonymize their activity and use that as a proxy to keep hidden. 22 TCP is SSH. Same reason as the 23 TCP, probably looking to see if anybody has that open and try to brute force password guess their way into those devices. 8080 TCP is HTTP usually. I always mention Tomcat runs on that. We know that there's a few actors out there specifically looking for Tomcat on 8080 because that's the default admin port for Tomcat. But there are some other types of web services that run on 8080 as well that they might be seeking out. 1900 UDP, this is an interesting one. This is SSDP, the Simple Service Discovery Protocol. We've talked about this one before on previous programs. It's had a pretty large jump, up 9 positions from before. And the intent here is probably distributed denial of service attacks, reflection attacks using these devices. And we'll take a look at a chart on that in a few minutes. 10,000 TCP, this is a little oddball one that Matt and I were kind of looking at just before we started taping the show today. This one is up 34 positions. That's pretty significant. And the chart is also pretty interesting on this one. So we're going to take a closer look at that one as well. 445 TCP, that's your SMB configure type things and other. There's a lot of infections out there still seeking that one out and scanning for that. 80 TCP is your normal web traffic. That could be for a variety of reasons. And then the ICMP stuff, echo requests, or just whatever. It's probably just normal business traffic. So the 9064 TCP, this is the proxy scanning. It's mostly coming from China. You can see I did a pretty long chart on this one, 120 days I'm showing. And you can see way back in July, even early August, there was no activity whatsoever on this port. And it has gone up. We had a kind of I wanted to show this long trend because probably we've talked about it, and the last time we really looked at it was maybe early, mid-December in this cutoff point here. And since then, it has resurged at the end of the year here, and it's even more scanning than we ever saw before, by maybe a 30% margin or so. So the activity is still increasing here, something to watch out for. I don't know, I wouldn't expect most people to have something listening on port 9064 TCP. I believe that this is mostly devices that are acting as proxy servers. I suspect, although I'm not positive, some of these devices that are acting as proxies on this port might be compromised devices that have been in turn turned into proxies. But I don't have any confirmation of that. That's a little speculative. But one to keep an eye on. If you see a lot of scanning activity on that, you probably have an infected device in your network or something. You might want to take a look at who's originating that source traffic if it's coming from inside your network going out to other devices. The 1900 SSDP. So, I'm sorry, 1900 UDP. So as with a lot of UDP protocols, if you can send a small packet and get more data than you initially sent in your UDP packet. Now UDP is connectionless again. You don't have that whole handshaking that you have with TCP. So if I can just find devices that are listening on SSDP and send a packet towards them and have them send something back, that would be great. So normally what they do in these types of reflection attacks is they'll scan for devices that are listening on the SSDP port, and believe it or not, there's a fair number of them out there. Not as many as some of these other ones like NTP that we've seen or DNS and whatnot, but there's a decent enough number that if you can get a list of these together, you could spoof the source IP, send it to a list of devices that you know are listening on port 1900 UDP, and then the responses all go back to your intended target. And the amplification factor is not super great. It's not like you can get with some of the NTP monolith stuff that we had early last year, but it's still enough. It's more than, if I send 30 bytes in, I might get 100 bytes back out. So there's some factor of amplification there. And so people are more aggressively scanning for that. You can kind of see that towards the end of December here. There's a little bit more density and height to these scanning activity that's going on here. So most of it's coming from the Netherlands, Germany, and France for whatever reason. Not sure why those countries are scanning more than others, but they are. And that's a good one to keep an eye out for. If you have devices, you might want to take a look in your own network, especially internet facing, to make sure you don't have devices that are answering 1900 UDP or have that open, because they can participate in these attacks unwilling or unknowingly to you probably. If somebody finds it, they could use you to bounce packets off towards an intended target.
Now, here's a thought about SSDP. Simple Service Discovery Protocol. Is there a value in perhaps using SSDP that's pointed towards the internet in an effort to try and map internal networks?
I think there might actually have been some studies done on that. I'm trying to remember now. There was a vulnerability discovered in one of these protocols. I can't remember if it was SSDP or not. Maybe you can remember. I don't know if Jim remembers or not either. But there was one kind of talked about maybe a month or a half ago or 2 months ago that discussed some devices that are listening. I don't think it was SSDP though. It was another one that
should have been pointing into the LAN, but instead
and by poking it, you could kind of arbitrarily open ports. It was that NAT PM. That's what it was. It was the NAT PMP one, right. Where people could kind of. It's coming back to me now. Too much time off. But in any event, I don't know if you can with SSDP. It does give you some information back, but I really haven't analyzed it. So it's pretty simple. I should say it's not trivial to do, but to send kind of an SSDP discovery query packet and get a response back. But to me, the response doesn't really mean a whole lot. I've never seen any super meaningful responses come back from devices. I think mostly these guys are using it for the amplification of factor alone. And we actually have some other reports that are not in our reporting here that definitely indicate 1900 UDP being used in reflection attacks. So we have some additional types of reporting we do that show certain victims getting targeted with that. Moving along, scanning on 10,000 TCP. Now this one's interesting. This is assigned as the Network Data Management Protocol in IANA, which I'm not quite sure what that means. I forget what the vendor was that was assigned to that. Long story short, though, you can definitely see there's a pattern here where we had some activity over the past, and actually I'm showing a 30-day chart here. We had some activity through December, but not a super large amount. But obviously there's a little bit of upsweep here. And then right around, I'm going to say January 4th probably, so just a few days ago, it has accelerated greatly. And this kind of waveform that we see here, where it spikes early on and kind of trails off, real indicative of botnet originated traffic. A lot of times what happens is botnet controller will tell bots to start scanning. The bots that have a lot of bandwidth, real aggressive, they finish their scan tasks early, other ones take longer, and you kind of get this kind of sloping waveform because of that. In any event, that's probably what's going on here. Why, though, is the next question. And the only two things I could really find was, well, the first one that Matt, you had found this one, zero-day initiative, and actually there is a CVE out for this as well. I don't think I listed it on the page here, but it's been put into the common vulnerability database. And there's an exploit vector that was announced in December 9th, which kind of correlates with the beginning of this. So I don't know whether this is related or not, but it's one plausible explanation. So BitTorrent web interface has a remote code execution vulnerability. If you send a specially crafted packet to port 10,000, you could potentially get some remote code to execute on those devices running BitTorrent, or at least the BitTorrent web interface. So I'm not quite sure how that's leveraged and whether it's related or not. What I did, the second possibility, is I looked in our sinkhole. Our sinkhole showed that we're getting incoming scanning on port 10,000 for this particular URL that I show you here, /cgi-bin/authlogin.cgi. And that happens to be associated with these QNAP devices, which I think that's kind of like an underlying suite perhaps, that there's a couple of different types of devices under that family, and there's a vulnerability in that's shell shock vulnerability that you can leverage. So it might be that why it's on port 10,000, I'm not sure, but I know that there's definitely some actors out there scanning on 10,000 for this shell shock bug. And it's embedded devices again. So we talked about the 23 TCP scanning that's been going on, and these other sorts of things. We know there's a lot of these Internet of Things, embedded devices getting compromised via shell shock, brute force password guessing on their telnet ports, and any other types of means. So this is a likely plausible. We know there's definitely some activity here. Whether it counts for all of this upsweep of activity, I'm not sure, but another thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, port 10,000 is one of those that, because it's a nice round number, has been used a lot by applications over the years. IANA did assign it to the Network Data Management Protocol, but I don't know, like you, I don't know anything about that protocol. I don't know people who actually use it. But, there have been, Webmin was on that, Veritas Backup back in the day was on that and was exploitable. This was a number of years ago, 10 years ago or more. EverQuest has been on there, BitTornado's been on there, and now these QNAP embedded devices have that management interface on there. So that's a port that, because it's a nice round number, people kind of liked it, and so they stuck all kinds of stuff on there.
Okay, well that's good input there.
Point of information, NDMP is apparently used for facilitating backup jobs between NASs, network attached storage devices, without having to involve a backup server. So whereas most users would come through a backup server to reach the NASs, this allows you to do backups from NAS 1 to NAS 2 to NAS 3 and never involve the server in the center. Whereas apparently protocol was developed by NetApp and Legato.
Okay.
So,
back in the day. Okay.
but it sounds like from Jim's list that this is one of many, many possibilities. So for what that's worth.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe we'll find out a little bit more information in the future. Obviously, it appears to be that there's a lot of aggressive scanning going on from our previous chart here within the past few days. Looks like a botnet's initiating that scanning. Haven't tried to do any analysis to figure out what botnet that might be, but another one to keep an eye out for, as well as look for any activity that you might see on port 10,000 TCP, because it's probably not traffic you want. Next chart here is the most sources probing. This tends to be a little bit better because this kind of shows when there's coordinated activity between botnets and things like that, where you've got a lot of sources doing coordinated scanning activity all at once. Not a whole lot of difference, no real big standouts from before. This one also doesn't change as much, the positions, because you need to get a lot of individual devices doing something in unison together.
Although what does stand out from this chart is the size of the slice for 23 TCP.
Right, good point. 23 TCP accounts for, well, I'm just eyeballing, but I'm going to say probably 40% or so, roughly, of the entire pie, even including the other stuff. So this is based on a large population of ports that could be scanned. So 23 TCP is really taking up a lot of the coordinated scanning activity. And again, like we talked about, a lot of embedded devices out there. These DSL modems, residential gateways, your
DVRs.
security camera DVRs. We talk about this all the time if you watch the show. And you want to make sure that if they're internet facing, that you've got those locked down. If you're not sure how to check, I don't really have good recommendations other than do some of your own port scanning against those from the internet, from a remote host, not from within your network, but try to poke your own devices to make sure that they're not listening on ports that you're not expecting them to be listening on, and especially 23 TCP. But even still, any of these other ports that we talk about would be good ones to go make sure that your devices are not listening on, because they might be exploited if they are. Or at the very least, they'll get brute forced. If you have Telnet and SSH open, there'll probably be actors out there trying to brute force password guess. If you're using SSH, you actually have a little bit better chance, especially if you use public-private key type. Use a key as a method to only permit access to your SSH via that instead of password-based. But in any event, additionally on the list here, 27015 UDP. No big surprise there. That's the gaming for the Valve Steam protocol. 445 TCP SMB, we talked about that one already. 6881 UDP, that's BitTorrent probably. It's a little bit increase in BitTorrent. Actually, it's gone down a notch from the previous week. I kind of wonder if there's a lot more BitTorrent over the holidays because people are home, they're on break, maybe even some movies that have been released. In the movies that shouldn't have been released that did get released, such as the one from Sony, might have increased a lot of BitTorrent activity. It's a little speculative, but a little bit of more BitTorrent than we had normally seen before, especially coming up in this list in the scan activity. I don't think we normally see BitTorrent in the top 10. 1900 UDP went up 8 positions, and we already talked about that. That's the SSDP again, probably related to botnets engaged in the scanning activity for finding devices that are vulnerable to that so they can use them in DDoS attacks. And then the last one was this 3159 UDP is up 1 position. This is an interesting chart as well. Now this is one where I don't think we've ever talked about this port. I don't know anything about this port. And this is a really interesting chart though, because this kind of shows us what happened while we were away. If you go back to prior to 1218 or 1217, it looks like about here, there was basically no scanning activity on this port, 3159 UDP. Incidentally, this is assigned in IANA to NavegaWeb Tarification, which I know nothing about that protocol either. What I am able to tell you is that we're seeing a lot of scanning activity here. It's gone from basically nothing up to a significant volume here, and it's mostly from the U.S., mostly from U.S. sources. Part of that makes me think that maybe this is somewhat legitimate activity. I wonder if it's some new peer-to-peer thing that I don't know about. So if anybody out there actually has information on it, I would be more than happy to please contact us and let us know what you know, so that we can relay that information to everybody who watches the show. But I'm not quite sure. I don't know if you found any other information either.
No, I think I found the name NavegaWeb on a Portuguese website. They seem to be either some sort of ISP or somehow involved with the internet space.
Mm-hmm.
Tarification, it may have been, this may be a mistranslation, but I think it has something to do with pricing or billing. So maybe there's a custom protocol here that was once used by this company or still is used by this company, but these are guesses.
Yeah. And in terms of...
I also saw on one of the sites where I look for information on ports that it was in the range of ports that was used by the Rainbow Six Vegas game. Now, that was several years ago, so I'm wondering if there was another video game of some sort that was using that port for some of the peer-to-peer stuff, because that was a PlayStation and Xbox game from a few years ago, 6-7 years ago, I think.
Yeah,
So,
I guess.
and just the timing of that, on that chart makes me think it did start a little before Christmas, but that kind of looks like a video game. Lots of students off school. Let's hit that pretty hard.
Right, it's possible. I guess the one thing that confuses me about it is typically with gaming, I guess it depends on how the gaming is set up. It wouldn't show up as scanning normally because it's usually directed. Like my gaming client's gonna connect to a pool of servers maybe and do that activity. Whereas this looks like scanning that's widespread across the internet. And they're looking all over the place for anything devices that are basically from 0.0.0.0 all the way up to whatever, 255, even though that's not really what they're doing. So that kind of has me a little confused, which makes me think it's more of something really peer-to-peer related, where you got a lot of devices all wanting to talk to each other for some reason. And I don't know. I guess maybe we'll find out more information as time goes on here, hopefully. It is kind of new, but it's one of those things that we had not seen prior to us kind of going away on break here. And now that we come back, there's definitely an increase in activity here that we should take note of and try to figure out more about what's going on here.
Yep, this is one I'm definitely going to look for on my home network and see if I can capture some packets.
Right, that's another good example. Yeah, good idea. If you can get some, like a sinkhole or a honeypot going and grab some packets of incoming traffic, scans for it.